The fluorescent lights of the Riverside Medical Clinic hummed overhead as 12-year-old Ayanna Begay sat in the cramped waiting room, her small hand gripping her grandmother's weathered fingers. The Arizona heat had followed them through the glass doors, but inside, the air conditioning made her shiver in her worn t-shirt. Her grandmother, Martha, spoke quietly in their native Apache language, words of comfort that couldn't quite mask the worry lines etched deep around her eyes. "Next," called the receptionist, barely looking up from her computer screen. Dr. Richard Sterling emerged from his office, his white coat pristine, his expression already shifting from professional courtesy to barely concealed irritation as his eyes fell on Ayanna and her grandmother. At 55, Dr. Sterling had built his practice in this border town of Riverside, Arizona, serving mostly the affluent residents who could afford his premium services. The occasional Native American patient was, in his view, more trouble than they were worth. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked curtly, not bothering to invite them to sit in his office. Martha spoke slowly in English, her accent thick, but her words clear. "My granddaughter, she has the diabetes. We need the insulin." The other doctor, he moved away. Dr. Sterling's jaw tightened. He'd heard about Dr. Martinez, the only physician in town who'd accepted patients from the nearby Apache reservation regardless of their ability to pay. Good riddance, he thought. "Do you have insurance?" Dr. Sterling asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "We have the Indian Health Service card," Martha replied, reaching into her worn purse. "I don't accept IHS. This is a private practice." Dr. Sterling's voice was flat, final. "You'll need to drive to the reservation clinic in White River. It's only 90 miles. Ayanna looked up at him, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, a burning intensity that made Dr. Sterling uncomfortable. She understood more English than she spoke, and she understood perfectly what was happening. "Please, doctor," Martha's voice cracked slightly. "The reservation clinic, they don't have enough medicine. My granddaughter, she needs this now. Without it, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. There are protocols, billing procedures. I suggest you contact social services." Dr. Sterling was already turning away, dismissing them with a wave of his hand, but Ayanna stepped forward, her young voice clear and steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "You're supposed to help sick people. That's what doctors do." Dr. Sterling turned back, his face flushing with annoyance. "Little girl, this is the real world. Medicine costs money. This isn't charity." His words were sharp, deliberately cruel. "Your people need to learn that handouts aren't the solution to everything." The waiting room fell silent. Even the receptionist looked up from her computer, uncomfortable with the doctor's tone. Martha's face showed the familiar pain of old wounds reopened, but Ayanna's expression had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by something harder, more determined. "I'll remember this," Ayanna said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that seemed impossible from someone so young. Dr. Sterling let out a condescending laugh. "I'm sure you will, sweetheart. Now, I have real patients to see." As they walked toward the door, Martha's shoulders bowed with defeat. Ayanna turned back one more time. She memorized everything. The diplomas on the wall, the expensive furniture, the way Dr. Sterling watched them leave with obvious relief. Most of all, she memorized how it felt to be seen as less than human, to be dismissed not for who she was, but for what others assumed she could never become. Outside in the parking lot, Martha sat heavily in their old pickup truck, her hands shaking as she tried to start the engine. The trip to White River would take 3 hours, and they were already low on gas. But they would make it, somehow. They always did. "Grandmother," Ayanna said as they pulled out of the clinic parking lot, "what do you have to do to become a doctor?" Martha looked at her granddaughter through the rearview mirror, seeing something in those young eyes that both frightened and filled her with pride. "Study hard, little one. Study harder than anyone expects you can." As the clinic grew smaller, in the distance, Ayanna pressed her face against the window, watching until Dr. Sterling's white coat disappeared from view. She was already planning, already dreaming of the day she would walk back through those glass doors, not as a patient begging for help, but as something Dr. Sterling had never imagined she could become. The seed of her future had been planted in that moment of rejection, watered by humiliation and fertilized by an unshakable determination. Dr. Sterling had no idea that his cruelty had just set in motion a chain of events that would one day cost him everything he held dear. 15 years had passed since that humiliating day at Riverside Medical Clinic, but for Dr. Ayanna Begay, as she was now known, the memory remained as sharp as a surgical scalpel. She stood in her Harvard Medical School graduation robes, the crimson and black fabric a stark contrast to the young girl in the worn t-shirt who had once been turned away from medical care. The journey had been anything but easy. After that day, with her grandmother, Ayanna had thrown herself into her studies with an intensity that worried even Martha. While other kids her age were playing video games or watching TV, Ayanna was at the tribal library, reading every medical textbook she could find. She taught herself advanced biology and chemistry, often staying up until 2 in the morning by candlelight when the electricity was cut off for non-payment. Her high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, had been the first person outside her family to truly believe in her potential. "You have something special, Ayanna," she had said during their first meeting. "But you're going to have to work twice as hard as everyone else to prove it." The scholarship to Arizona State University had been her first major victory. Pre-med with a full ride, based on academic merit and an essay about health disparities in Native American communities. Her professors were initially surprised by the quiet Apache girl who consistently scored at the top of every exam, who stayed after class to ask probing questions, who approached every assignment as if her life depended on it, because it did. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, her organic chemistry professor, became an unexpected mentor. "I see hunger in you," Dr. Rodriguez had told her after a particularly challenging exam that Ayanna had aced. "But it's not just ambition. It's something deeper. I want to make sure no one ever feels the way I did when I was 12. Ayanna had replied, and she told Dr. Rodriguez about that day at the clinic. "Then you understand what true medicine is about," Dr. Rodriguez had said. "It's not about the money or the prestige. It's about being present in someone's most vulnerable moment and choosing to help rather than turn away." The MCAT scores that earned her admission to Harvard were just numbers, but they represented countless hours of study, sacrifice, and determination. Her grandmother Martha had lived to see her accepted to medical school, passing away peacefully 2 weeks after Ayanna received her acceptance letter, as if she had been waiting for that final confirmation that her granddaughter would fulfill her destiny. Medical school brought new challenges. Ayanna was often the only Native American in her classes, frequently the only person who understood what it meant to drive 90 miles for basic health care, to choose between medication and groceries, to be seen as somehow less deserving of medical attention. Her classmates came from privilege she could barely imagine. Families where being a doctor was expected, not revolutionary, but she excelled. Her clinical rotations revealed a natural gift for diagnosis and in bedside manner that put patients immediately at ease. Dr. James Mitchell, her surgery attending, noted in her evaluation, "Dr. Begay possesses an unusual combination of technical skill and genuine empathy. She has the rare ability to see each patient as a whole person, not just a collection of symptoms." It was during her family medicine rotation that Ayanna began planning her return to Arizona. She specialized in family medicine and public health, knowing that this combination would give her the tools she needed not just to treat patients, but to address the systemic inequalities that had shaped her own childhood. The day she received her MD degree, Ayanna stood on the Harvard campus and called the one person she wished could have been there. She dialed the number for Riverside Medical Clinic. "Riverside Medical, this is Jennifer speaking. Hello, I'd like to inquire about Dr. Sterling's practice. Is he still the primary physician there?" "Yes, Dr. Sterling has been here for over 20 years. Are you looking to schedule an appointment?" "Not exactly," Ayanna said, watching her classmates celebrate with their families. "I'm wondering if Dr. Sterling might be interested in selling his practice. I'm a physician looking to establish myself in the area." There was a pause. "Oh, well, you'd have to speak with Dr. Sterling directly about that. But I don't think he's looking to retire anytime soon." "I see. What if someone made him an offer he couldn't refuse?" After hanging up, Ayanna researched everything she could about Dr. Sterling and his practice. What she found was troubling, but not surprising. Multiple complaints to the medical board about discriminatory practices, though none had resulted in significant action. Several malpractice suits that had been quietly settled. a pattern of treating wealthy patients while neglecting or refusing care to the poor and minorities. But she also found something interesting. Dr. Sterling was heavily in debt. His expensive lifestyle, multiple properties, and recent divorce had left him financially vulnerable. His practice, while profitable on paper, was leveraged to the hilt. Ayanna smiled as she reviewed the financial records she'd obtained through public filings. Dr. Sterling had made a crucial error 15 years ago. He had underestimated a 12-year-old Apache girl, dismissing her as inconsequential. He was about to learn that his biggest mistake wasn't refusing her treatment. It was failing to recognize the fire he had lit in her eyes that day. The black BMW pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Medical Clinic on a crisp October morning, its tinted windows reflecting the Arizona sun. Dr. Ayanna Begay stepped out, her professional attire impeccable, a tailored navy suit, leather briefcase, and the confidence that came from years of proving herself in rooms where she wasn't expected to belong. At 27, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had earned every achievement through sheer determination. The clinic looked exactly as she remembered, though perhaps a bit more worn around the edges. The same glass doors, the same beige exterior that had seemed so imposing when she was 12. Now it looked smaller, ordinary even. She paused for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment, then walked through the entrance she had been forced to exit in humiliation 15 years earlier. The receptionist, a different woman than before, looked up with the practiced smile reserved for well-dressed potential patients. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I have an appointment with Dr. Sterling." "Dr. Ayanna Begay." "Of course, Dr. Begay. He's expecting you. Please have a seat, and I'll let him know you're here." Ayanna chose not to sit. Instead, she stood near the wall where Dr. Sterling's diplomas hung, studying them with the eye of someone who now understood exactly what they represented. University of Arizona School of Medicine. Not Harvard, not Johns Hopkins, but respectable. His certifications were current, his credentials legitimate. He was, by all technical measures, a competent physician, which made his behavior toward her family all the more inexcusable. "Dr. Begay?" Dr. Sterling emerged from his office, extending his hand with the calculated warmth of a businessman rather than a healer. At 60, he looked every bit the successful small-town doctor, silver at his temples, expensive watch, perfectly pressed white coat. "Richard Sterling, thank you for coming." Ayanna shook his hand, studying his face for any sign of recognition. There was none. To him, she was simply Dr. Begay, a young physician with impressive credentials and, apparently, access to significant capital. The 12-year-old Apache girl who had stood in this same waiting room was invisible to him, forgotten as easily as yesterday's newspaper. "Thank you for meeting with me, Dr. Sterling. I understand you might be interested in discussing the future of your practice. Please, call me Richard. And yes, let's talk in my office." The office was larger than she remembered, filled with expensive furniture and medical equipment that spoke of a successful practice. Dr. Sterling gestured to a leather chair across from his mahogany desk, the same desk where he had signed prescriptions for patients he deemed worthy while denying care to others. "I'll be honest, Dr. Begay," Dr. Sterling began, leaning back in his chair with practiced ease. "When my attorney mentioned that a Harvard-trained physician was interested in acquiring my practice, I was skeptical. Riverside isn't exactly a destination for doctors with your credentials. Most end up in Phoenix or Tucson, where they can make real money." "I'm not most doctors," Ayanna replied evenly. "I'm interested in serving communities that are often overlooked. I believe healthcare is a right, not a privilege." Dr. Sterling's smile faltered slightly. "Well, that's admirable. But you should understand, this practice has built its reputation on providing premium care to patients who can afford it. The economics of medicine require certain practical considerations, such as turning away patients based on their insurance or their race." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Dr. Sterling's friendly demeanor shifted, his eyes narrowing as he studied Ayanna more carefully. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Dr. Begay, but this practice operates within all legal and ethical guidelines. We simply maintain standards that ensure we can provide the best possible care to our patients." "Your patients," Ayanna repeated. "And who decides who qualifies as a patient worthy of your care?" Dr. Sterling stood up, his jaw tight. "I think There may be some misunderstanding about why you're here. If you're some kind of activist looking to make accusations, sit down, Dr. Sterling." The command in her voice was unmistakable, the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in operating rooms and emergency situations. Dr. Sterling hesitated, then slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Ayanna opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. 15 years ago, you refused to treat a 12-year-old Apache girl who desperately needed insulin. You told her and her grandmother that this wasn't charity, that her people needed to learn that handouts weren't the solution to everything. Dr. Sterling's face went pale as the memory began to surface. You sent a diabetic child away to drive 90 miles to an understaffed clinic because she had Indian Health Service insurance instead of private coverage. You looked at a sick little girl and saw only a burden, an inconvenience, someone without value. I don't recall the specific incident, but if there was a misunderstanding, there was no misunderstanding. Ayanna's voice was steady, controlled, but underneath was steel that had been forged over 15 years of proving herself. That little girl was me. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Sterling stared at her, seeing for the first time, not the successful physician sitting across from him, but the desperate child he had dismissed so callously. His hands trembled slightly as the full implications of the situation began to dawn on him. "Now," Ayanna continued, sliding the folder across his desk, "let's discuss the future of your practice. Your practice that's currently $2.3 million in debt, facing 3 pending malpractice suits, and under investigation by the State Medical Board for discriminatory practices." Dr. Sterling opened the folder with shaking hands, his eyes scanning financial documents that laid bare every detail of his precarious situation. "You have 2 choices," Ayanna said, her voice carrying the quiet authority she had earned through years of saving lives and fighting for patients who had no other advocate. "You can sell this practice to me for a fair price, retire with some dignity intact, and I'll ensure your remaining patients receive the quality care they deserve. Or you can refuse, and I'll make sure every medical board in the state knows about your pattern of discrimination. Every bank understands your financial vulnerabilities, and every potential patient learns exactly what kind of doctor you really are." Dr. Sterling looked up from the documents, his earlier confidence completely shattered. The successful, respected physician was gone, replaced by a man who finally understood that his past had caught up with him. "The choice is yours, Dr. Sterling. But this time, I'm not a powerless child begging for help. This time, I'm the one with the power to say yes or no." 6 months later, the sign outside the clinic read, "Riverside Community Health Center, Dr. Ayanna Begay, MD, Director." The changes were visible from the moment patients walked through the same glass doors that had once been a barrier to care. Gone was the intimidating sterility of Dr. Sterling's practice, replaced by warm earth tones and artwork created by local Native American artists. Informational posters in both English and Apache decorated the walls, and the waiting room chairs were arranged in a circle rather than rigid rows, reflecting the community-centered approach that now defined the clinic. Dr. Sterling had accepted her offer with the defeated resignation of a man who finally understood he had no other choice. The sale had been completed quickly and quietly, with Dr. Sterling retiring to a modest condo in Scottsdale, his days of playing God with people's healthcare definitively over. His former receptionist, Jennifer, had stayed on, initially skeptical of the changes, but gradually becoming one of Ayanna's strongest supporters as she watched the transformation unfold. "Dr. Begay, your 2 o'clock is here," Jennifer announced, her voice carrying a warmth that had been absent during the Sterling years. Mrs. Santos brought her grandson for his follow-up. Ayanna looked up from the patient chart she was reviewing, smiling at the mention of 8-year-old Miguel Santos, who had been one of her first patients when she took over the practice. Miguel had been suffering from untreated asthma, his family afraid to seek medical care after being turned away from multiple clinics due to their undocumented status. "Send them in," Ayanna said, standing to greet her patients in the doorway, a practice that had surprised many of her patients, accustomed to doctors who remained seated behind imposing desks. "Doctora Ayanna." Miguel burst through the door. With the enthusiasm only children possess, his grandmother, Rosa, following behind with a grateful smile that still brought tears to Ayanna's eyes. "Miguel, Mijo, how are you feeling? Ayana knelt to the boy's eye level, a habit she'd developed that helped put young patients at ease. So much better. I can run and play soccer now, just like the other kids. Miguel demonstrated by taking several deep breaths without the wheezing that had characterized their first meeting. Rosa Santos squeezed Ayana's hand, her eyes bright with tears of gratitude. Doctora, you saved my grandson's life. When the other doctors turned us away, you don't have to thank me, Rosa. This is what healthcare should be, available to everyone who needs it, regardless of their ability to pay or their documentation status. The appointment continued with Miguel's routine checkup, but Ayana's mind wandered briefly to the transformation this single room had witnessed. Where Dr. Sterling had once turned away the sick and vulnerable, she now treated anyone who walked through her doors. The clinic had become exactly what she had dreamed of during those long nights studying by candlelight on the reservation, a place where healing took precedence over profit. After Miguel and his grandmother left, Ayana walked to the window that overlooked the parking lot. A steady stream of patients came and went. Elderly white ranchers who had initially been skeptical of the young Native American doctor, but were now among her most loyal patients. Young Latino families who no longer had to drive hours to find someone who would treat them with dignity. Apache teenagers from the reservation who could now receive mental health counseling and reproductive health care without judgment. The doctor, Maria Gonzalez, whom Ayana had recruited as her partner in the practice, joined her at the window. Busy day, Maria observed, reviewing the appointment schedule on her tablet. The best kind, Ayana replied. Remember when we were in medical school and they told us we had to choose between doing well and doing good? Turns out they were wrong, Maria said with a smile. This place is more profitable now than it ever was under Sterling, and we're providing care to 3 times as many patients. It was true. By accepting insurance that Sterling had refused, negotiating payment plans for uninsured patients, and partnering with community organizations, the clinic had become both a financial success and a pillar of the community. The model had attracted attention from healthcare policy experts and medical schools, with Ayana frequently invited to speak about community-centered healthcare. But for Ayana, the real measure of success wasn't in the financial reports or academic recognition. It was in moments like today, when a little boy could breathe freely because someone had chosen to help rather than turn away. As the afternoon progressed, Ayana found herself in the same office where Dr. Sterling had once dismissed her as worthless. The diplomas on the wall were now hers: Harvard Medical School, her residency certificates, awards from medical associations recognizing her work in community health. But more importantly, the office now served a different purpose entirely. Her final patient of the day was a 15-year-old Apache girl named Sarah, who had been referred by the school counselor for depression and anxiety. As Sarah sat in the chair across from Ayana's desk, the same chair where 12-year-old Ayana had once begged for insulin, the symmetry of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. Sarah, I want you to know that whatever you're going through, you're not alone, Ayana said gently. And I want you to know that your dreams, whatever they are valid and achievable. Sarah looked up, her eyes carrying the same mixture of pain and determination that Ayana remembered from her own adolescence. Dr. Begay, some of the kids at school say I should just accept that this is how things are for people like us, that we shouldn't aim too high. Ayana leaned forward, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who had lived the truth of her words. Sarah, 15 years ago, I sat in this same chair as a patient whose doctor refused to treat me because of who I was and where I came from. That doctor saw me as worthless, as someone without a future. Today, I own this clinic. I've saved lives, trained other doctors, and created a place where every person who walks through that door is treated with dignity and respect. She paused, letting the words sink in. The people who tell you to aim low are afraid of what you might become if you aim high. Don't let their fear limit your future. As Sarah left with a treatment plan and a prescription for therapy sessions, Ayana remained in her office as the sun set over Riverside. The clinic was quiet now, but tomorrow would bring new patients, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that healthcare was indeed a right, not a privilege. She thought of her grandmother Martha, who had lived just long enough to see her accepted to medical school, but not long enough to witness this moment of complete vindication. She thought of Dr. Sterling, whose cruelty had inadvertently set in motion the very forces that would ultimately strip him of his power and transform his practice into everything he had stood against. Most of all, she thought of that 12-year-old girl who had been turned away from this very building, told she was worthless, that her people needed to stop expecting handouts. That little girl had made a promise that day. "I'll remember this," and she had kept it. But the memory had been transformed from a wound into a source of strength, from humiliation into determination, from rejection into the foundation of a new kind of healing that served everyone. Regardless of their ability to pay or the color of their skin, Ayanna locked the clinic doors and headed home. She passed the small plaque she had installed near the entrance. Riverside Community Health Center. Healthcare is a human right. Below it, in smaller text that only those who looked closely would notice, were words in Apache that translated to, "What was meant to break us can make us stronger." The young woman who had once been turned away, denied not just medicine, but basic compassion, had returned at last. But she did not return with bitterness in her heart or vengeance in her hands. Instead, she came bearing something far more rare and powerful: healing. Not just the physical kind found in prescriptions and procedures, but the deeper healing that comes from compassion, from justice, from rewriting a story that once seemed doomed to repeat cycles of pain and exclusion. Ayanna had not come to settle a score. She came to serve, to restore, to reclaim a space that had once dismissed her as unworthy of care, and to turn it into a sanctuary where no one would ever again be made to feel invisible. In stepping into the role once held by Dr. Sterling, the very man who had once looked through her as if she were nothing more than a burden, she did not just take over a medical practice. She redefined its very soul. What she accomplished went far beyond any notion of revenge. Revenge might have satisfied for a moment, but Ayanna wasn't interested in fleeting satisfaction. What she built was lasting. She transformed a place stained by prejudice into a beacon of possibility, into a refuge for those who had long been pushed to the margins. Her presence, her leadership, her unwavering belief in the dignity of every human life. These things reshaped the community itself. The clinic, once a cold institution governed by rigid rules and quiet cruelty, had become warm and open. Children, who had once walked past it in fear, now stepped inside holding their mothers' hands, hopeful. Elders who had resigned themselves to suffering found comfort and dignity again. Those without insurance, without voices, without hope, all of them, found a place under Ayanna's care. And more than that, they found someone who saw them, truly saw them. In doing this, Ayanna didn't simply rise above the man who had once denied her care. She transcended everything he stood for. She dismantled, with quiet strength and unwavering compassion, the very foundations of exclusion and indifference that had once governed that space. Her triumph was not loud or vengeful. It was steady, principled, and deeply human. She became, in every way, the antithesis of Dr. Sterling, not just in action, but in spirit. Where he had turned people away, she opened doors. Where he saw inconvenience, she saw humanity. Where he once upheld systems that favored the privileged and ignored the vulnerable, Ayanna stood as a living rejection of those values, choosing instead to build something radically inclusive, something rooted in empathy and grace. She became everything he never was, compassionate not just in word, but in the small, daily acts that mattered most. Inclusive in a way that made even the most invisible patient feel seen and valued. Fiercely human, in a world that often demanded detachment from those in power. And it was this humanity, not a title, not a degree, not even her medical skill, that made her unforgettable. Meanwhile, the name Dr. Sterling faded, not with drama, but with a chilling quietness, like the slow erosion of a forgotten monument. Once etched in plaques and announced in firm handshakes, his name became something people hesitated to speak, remembered only as a warning. A cautionary tale of what happens when knowledge is stripped of empathy, when power is held without responsibility, when a healer forgets how to care. But Ayanna's name, hers became something else entirely. It began to echo softly, reverently, through the clinic's hallways, spoken with the kind of warmth that fills a room, even in silence. Children spoke it with innocent admiration, mothers with tearful relief, elders with a quiet reverence reserved for those who restore dignity. Her name lived not just in conversations, but in gestures, in the way a hand was held longer during bad news, in the comfort of a familiar voice during pain, in the laughter that slowly returned to the waiting room. Her name became a symbol, not just of one woman's triumph, but of what a place and a people could become when love and justice led the way. It was whispered in gratitude, spoken with respect, etched into memory with a love so enduring that even time would have to honor it. The building itself began to reflect the change. Where once there had been sterile white walls and the cold tick of an indifferent clock, now there were murals, vivid colors painted by local artists, celebrating culture, resilience, and life. The waiting room, once unwelcoming, was now filled with books, toys, soft chairs, and sunlight. The very air seemed to carry a different energy, one of healing, of hope, and at the center of it all stood Ayanna, firm, kind, and resolute. Her guiding principle never wavered, that healthcare is not a privilege, but a right. That no person, regardless of race, status, language, or past, should be denied the chance to live with dignity. It was this belief, simple and radical, that became the cornerstone of her legacy. For Dr. Sterling, forgetting that truth had cost him everything: his practice, his reputation, and ultimately, his place in a community he had once claimed to serve. But for Ayanna, holding on to that truth had built a foundation that would outlast her. Her work would continue through the hands she trained, the patients she healed, the hearts she inspired. Long after she is gone, the community will remember her, not just as a doctor, but as a symbol of transformation, as proof that healing is always possible, and that the most powerful victories are not those won in battles, but those earned through quiet, courageous acts of compassion that ripple outward, changing everything in their path.